So
rocket won't land on me.
Все нормально, все, не реветь.
Yes, I think that video makes very, very clear what this conference is about and why it's important to have this conference. Our first panel discussion will almost start. I would like to invite the panelists to come and join me on stage. I will introduce them properly to you in a moment. They are Teresa Ribeiro, Indrė Makaraitytė, Manica Ambrožič, Ricardo Gutierrez, Tikhon Dzyadko, and Peter Tervelde. I'll tell you more about them in a minute as they take a seat on stage. Make yourselves comfortable. There's water and you each have a microphone. The seat closest to me is mine, so thank you so much for joining me here. And the reason I'm not introducing them yet to you is that before I do that, we go to Ukraine, a country that has become a focal point in innumerable ways, not in the least, and very much so, where the importance of good journalism and public service media and freedom of speech and of opinion are concerned. So we are joined now by Андгеліна Кар'якіна, head of news at UA, the Ukrainian public broadcaster. And yes, we can see you, Андгеліна. Thank you for joining us. And let me start with a very simple question. What has your day been like so far?
Thank you for having me. I've been lucky since morning because I do have power, light, and internet, and connection, and water, and even heating. So I have to say I'm fine. Unlike hundreds of thousands of people in my country right now, I'm good to go with the conference.
Speak of power cuts, and we've heard about that here in the news, of course. How is it still possible to do the job if you have to take that into account, practically speaking?
Well, of course, it's a factor that you cannot ignore and that you have to keep in mind while organizing broadcasting. And we had to also reconsider the way our digital operations work, because through the COVID years, as everyone, we have elaborated workflow, remote workflow for our people who are working from different parts of the country. But now with the power cuts, we had to reconsider it. Some of the people also come to office because our office in Kiev is secured. Our offices in other cities are secured. So in our case, in the case of Ukraine, vital is diversification. It means that you cannot hold everyone together in one place. You cannot hold all the resources in one place. You have to, well, disperse the team, disperse the resources, secure yourself with a generator, with a Starlink, sometimes also with water, sleeping bags and other things. Yeah, we manage. We do. I mean, yeah. we don't have other options.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned in an earlier interview, in Ukraine, journalism is a means of survival. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Of course. I have to say that quite often the public service media are compared to, at least in Ukraine, we had this comparison. We're compared to an ambulance. You don't call ambulance, you don't need ambulance each day. But there are certain moments in life when you turn to ambulance and you need ambulance, you need verified, objective information. This is what the public broadcaster and the public broadcaster in Ukraine is about. And this is what we see during this all-out invasion, that our audiences skyrocketed. People in different regions throughout the whole country. We do have more than 20 offices operating in every region. So local audience of each office of the public broadcaster in each region increased, in numbers, because the public broadcaster is providing not only news, and news is also about vital information. If you do hear blast, if there is a shelling, if there is an air alarm, if there is a power cut, things like that, it really provides verified information. For example, in Kharkiv, one of the biggest cities in Ukraine, before the invasion, the system of municipal air alarms was damaged. I don't know, maybe it was damaged on purpose. We don't know. We don't have this information. But the public broadcaster of Kharkiv sort of became this municipal air alarm on their Telegram, letting know the Kharkiv locals and actually the whole Ukraine when the air alarm is actually in the city. They call the guy, who is supposed to be pushing the button in Kharkiv, an air alarm, checking if there is an error, and the guy is calling them as well. And they're letting people know. So this is how it works.
Yeah, so you stress the importance of having people on the ground, but the importance also of local departments, if I may call it that, both to connect with people where they are, but also to provide information for the whole country. Is that correct? The importance of local branches is very important.
Well, imagine just February and March, when the invasion took place simultaneously in several regions. So the Russian troops were coming to Ukraine through the northern border, through eastern border. They were attacking also through southeast. And this is a situation in which national media, having a crew or most crews in Kiev, it would have been just impossible for them to cover the whole country. This is where, having an office in Sumy, in Chernihiv, in Kharkiv, in Mariupol, in Donbass, in Odessa, Mykolaiv, and you name it, came in hand. I mean, the local people were able to cover. We were not able to reach, for example, Chernihiv for quite a long time. But the locals were staying there, and they did a great job covering what really happened there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the core business, of course, of public service media is providing verified facts and news. But at the same time, this is a war being fought on the information front, as it were. How do you deal with fake news going around and making sure that people know they can rely on the information that you, as a public service broadcaster, provide?
First of all, I think essential is working in the field. As we already discussed, with your previous question, having people on the ground in the regions doesn't give you this space for manipulation. Like, nobody knows what is happening actually in Kherson. Nobody knows what is happening actually in Chernihiv. We do know because we have people on the ground. And even we had these editorial discussions. For example, it is impossible for you to say if you hear a blast, what kind of blast is it? Is it a blast coming from the anti-aircraft, missiles, Ukrainian anti-aircraft missiles? Is it a Russian rocket hitting something? Is it a place in the city or just very close to the city? But the fact is that you hear a blast, and until you verify what kind of blast, where, why, whether there are any casualties, you do have a responsibility to report about the blast. This is when we had sort of an agreement that we do report on the blasts that we hear in the city. And it is very, very important for people to understand that when you hear blasts in the city, there is probably an air alarm, and you need to stay. You need to stay in place. So being in the field, and being in the place where things need to be reported, like entering Bucha, entering Kherson, which we did one of the first, to make sure you can really see these pictures and deliver these pictures, and then witness and then become witness about it and share your witness accounts about it. It is essential. It doesn't give you like space for manipulation. I mean, I myself, I've been in Bucha, I've seen the bodies, I've seen the state of the bodies. So nobody can ever tell me, what happened there, because I've been there and I've seen it. But that's one side. Another side is that, of course, we are operating under the martial law, and there are lots of like restrictions. It is obvious and it is understandable. I mean, it makes sense security-wise. We cannot report as fast as we want. We cannot live stream from places very frequently. We cannot report on many things in terms of operations on the ground. I mean, the front line. But the access in Ukraine to the front line, I think, is unprecedented. I don't think that ever in history you could have had more than at least 6,000 journalists in the place where, a war is taking place with an access to almost any part of the country, except, of course, for the temporary occupied territories by Russia. Mm-hmm.
Is the fact that so many journalists from outside Ukraine are also coming to Ukraine to cover the war, is it a help or can it be cumbersome as well?
No, of course. I mean, there are thousands, as I said, thousands of journalists with different background, with different purpose. But of course, it is important that everyone's job is to make sure that the world knows what is happening in Ukraine and what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So, of course, for me, it's absolutely a positive fact. I know that, and we can see that so many crews, especially the crews of the public broadcasters, are working just shoulder to shoulder with our crews, risking, on the same level as we do. Of course, they have the luxury of coming back home to a safe place with no rockets, no air alarms, and no power cuts. But at the same place, it's the job that we do. Of course, it's positive.
Yeah.
But sorry, I need also to add one very, very important thing. I think that what we learned throughout these months and maybe years of war is that it is important that the world media that is coming and doing this incredibly risky and incredibly important job is that they also deliver the context, because this war is not only about breaking news, and it didn't start on the 24th of February. It's not also about 8 years of this war since 2014. It's not just a regional conflict between two countries. It has a much more deeper colonial imperialistic background. It needs to be explained. I mean, the fact and the phenomenon of Ukrainian resistance, like people resisting Russian troops with bare hands. I mean, how do you explain it? Why would people in the villages do that? How do you explain it to the foreign audience without explaining what is Ukraine about, what is Russia is about, what happened in Ukraine and Russia over the past decades and hundreds of years? That is something that needs to be explained from Ukraine, not sitting from their offices in Moscow, which used to be a practice for many global media for decades and decades, having headquarters in Moscow and then traveling from time to time to Ukraine, to Belarus, to Kazakhstan, you name it.
Yeah, the importance of being where things are happening, and also in-depth analysis is what you stress here. In terms of challenges, what would you say are the most important challenges you're facing right now, and what kind of support would help you do your job in Ukraine as a public service media?
Well, first of all, let me thank you from the Ukrainian public broadcaster for all the support that the European Broadcasting Union and other international organizations and broadcasters individually have provided us. I mean, without it, I cannot imagine how we would deal. I mean, of course, you can imagine that the public broadcasting in a state that is resisting an all-out invasion and all the energy crisis and other things, the public broadcaster is not the priority number one in terms of the state budget. So with all that support, we have been able to provide what we have been providing over this time, also from the region. So a huge thank you from all our teams. We do understand that the condition number one is that this war needs to be stopped. It's senseless, violent, genocidal war, and all the journalists that have been here and that have witnessed it can probably share this. I mean, we need not only to. I mean, there are so many, so many calls from international communities for peace, that we need peace in Ukraine. Of course, we do need peace. It's a vital thing, but we need to win it. I mean, there is no peace without winning this war. And in order to win it, of course, we need like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not here for the public broadcasters to ask, for weapons or HIMARSs for Ukraine. But it's a complicated job. And I think in order for Ukraine to win this war, we need the global media and the European public broadcasters to explain to their audiences that unless this war is won by Ukraine now, this war will come to their houses as well. It needs to be it needs to be explained by means of your crews and your efforts, and we are happy to help you in any way. We, of course, as a journalist and as a media manager, I also need to explain that journalism is in Ukraine at times, in the times of war, is physically challenging. In order to broadcast, every broadcaster needs to secure a bomb shelter studio. It's budget-wise, it's very expensive. So if you are a smaller regional broadcasters, of course, it's a huge challenge for you. So many regional newsrooms are disrupted because they lost their offices, they lost connection, they lost just financial, economic means to survive. We need connection. I mean, the connection is already and will be over the course of the summer one of the biggest challenges. So there are many things, for us to secure in order to keep on doing, but we will be doing our job. We don't have other option. I mean, this is the only way for us to survive, because this is a war against our survival. But also for you to understand why we do this, and for you to help us, you need to report, you need to be here.
Okay. Андгеліна Кар'якіна, thank you very much again for joining us with your report and heartfelt message. We are going to talk about it more during the rest of the day. So thank you very much for your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. That was a powerful message, I think I may say. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you the panelists. To begin with, at the far end, Teresa Ribeiro, OSCE representative on freedom of the media. Next to her, Manica Ambrožič, former editor-in-chief of RTV SLO, Public Broadcast TV in Slovenia. Welcome to you too. Next to her is Indrė Makaraitytė. Welcome, head of the investigative unit at LRT here in Lithuania. Tikhon Dzyadko, welcome, editor-in-chief of TV Rain, Dozhd TV Channel. And next to you, Peter ter Velde, project manager of Persveilig. And next to me here, Ricardо Gutierrez, general secretary of the European Federation of Journalists. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. There's a lot to discuss. The idea of this panel really is to touch upon a number of aspects of what is needed, not so much what is needed, but the state of affairs in journalism, the difficulties faced, and the way freedom of the press and of media in general is being encroached upon, is being hampered. Ms. Ribeiro, let me start with you. The Secretary General of the Council of Europe earlier this morning said each of us has to play a role to ensure a safe environment for PSM to do their job, to be able to do their job. What would you say is the OCSE's role in this? Because at first sight, it may seem a bit not really odd, but you're not directly journalistically involved, let's say. But what would your role be?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you also for having me today. It's really a pleasure to have the possibility of being here and to discuss. And nothing could be better to frame our discussion than to listen to the real challenges on the ground faced, in this case, by the public service in Ukraine, and that were voiced and brought to us by Angelina. So nothing could be better and more inspiring. Regarding the OSCE and the role it plays and the role the representative on freedom of the media plays in this big common endeavor, which is the public service, which is democracy, which is security, which is media freedom. And let me just very briefly refer that this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the institution of the representative on freedom of the media. And you know, we chose, and it was last year, as a slogan for our 25th anniversary, there is no security without media freedom. Because we need really to reinforce the connection, to understand the connection between media freedom and security and peace. As you know, OSCE is the largest security cooperation organization, and the RFOM is an independent institution, but within the framework of a security organization. Mm-hmm. So for us, it was very important to reinforce the identity of the RFOM as a pillar of security, as an important part of the security.
And what would that mean in practice, for example, in Ukraine or for Ukrainian media?
Yes, let's and what Angelina said about the work of journalists, about not only letting us know what is going on the ground, which is very important, but she said something which I think is key. It's explain. Explain is really important, and why? Because this is what can shape public opinion and can influence the process, the international process of decision making. We need to understand what is at stake in Ukraine. So journalists are essential, and they play a big role regarding this explanation, the understanding, and the influence they can have on the international decision-making process. This is one thing, but at the same time, and I will finish right now, it's also because imagine that we did not have journalists on the ground. It would be like a black hole. We knew nothing about what is going on. So we need to keep them doing their mission, doing their work on the ground, for the reasons I mentioned, but also because they are collecting important evidence that will be key for accountability mechanisms in the future.
Again,
war crimes,
very important.
Example.
Yeah, thank you very much. Riccardo Gutierrez, I want to come to you, General Secretary of the European Federation of Journalists. Talk about security here. What's going on in Ukraine? Putting it in perspective, the work journalists are doing there. Is this unprecedented? Is there something new in your experience to what we see happening there in terms of journalistic work and so on? Or is this just everyday work, let's say, but now closer to home from a European perspective?
Well, safety of journalists has become everyday work, indeed, for journalist organizations and the federation I represent. But we were not really ready to what happened in Ukraine. And just to tell you an anecdote,
Can you keep the microphone?
Yes, of course.
Quite close, yes.
Yes,
thank
like
you.
This. Okay. Just to tell you an anecdote. Initially, after the invasion, our first reaction in Brussels, because the European Federation of Journalists is based in Brussels, was to think about evacuation plans for journalists.
Get them out of there instead of keeping them there.
And we were wrong, because our affiliates in the country told us immediately, but no, we should stay, our duty is to report what's happening in the country. So we changed our mind, and in a few weeks we set up a plan to create open newsrooms in the country. First in the western Ukraine, because it was more safe, and then in eastern part. So we have now 6 open newsrooms, open to local journalists, because you have 25,000 journalists operating in Ukrainian journalists, I mean. Some of them joined the army, more or less a third of them.
Embedded then, or
no, just they joined the army because there was a call for mobilization, and of course they became, so from our point of view, they are not anymore journalists, but yes, you know, it's important to know. And the other are still operating, but most of them, they don't have anymore, Angelina mentioned the regional media, the local media, they don't have a newsroom anymore, so it was important to provide them with connections, Starlink connections, open spaces where they can find protection equipment as well. We sent helmets, bulletproof vests, and so on, safety kits, but also a place where it's possible for them to work, to continue to do their job as journalists. So, and this, to come back to your question, we were not prepared to this, but I should say that I've been amazed by the massive solidarity from journalist organizations to fund this, to finance this. We launched a call for solidarity to journalist organizations, and in a few days we collected 500,000 euros, which was more than enough for us to and we are still funding these 6 now. We call them solidarity centers, for journalist solidarity centers in Ukraine. We secured the functioning, because we are paying the salaries of people, dealing with these centers until January, and I'm rather sure we will find a way to continue, because this will. I mean, we'll need solidarity on the long term.
Yeah. If we're talking about it being important to be there and to understand what's going on, how important is it to be in Russia also as independent media?
It was not easy to explain this to politicians in Europe, in Western Europe. But I used to tell them that this war is creating victims in Russia too. After the first weeks of the invasion, we collected 800 names of journalists willing to leave Russia. And it was impossible for them to leave. The only way for them was to travel to Istanbul. Many of them were stuck there. And I should say that Western governments were not, really open to the idea to provide them with visas. So indeed, I think it's more important than ever to think about independent voices in Russia, which are today really under pressure, and some of them leaving the country. Many of them in a position where they cannot continue to do their work as journalists. So many are silent, and we should understand this.
Yeah.
Others willing to launch, we have initiatives from Russian journalists trying to launch new media outlets, new websites.
But also foreign journalists going to Russia to report?
Yeah, but I would say that for these journalists, except some freelancers, these journalists working for public service media, for example, sent to, they are prepared, they are covered by insurances, and they have connections in the country. So I mean, their situation is not so difficult or so. I think
and you think
more
it's
about
worthwhile for them being there?
I think it's important.
Speaking.
I think it's important, even if it's difficult to report from Russia, because there are
you have to think of every word you use.
But we need to be there. Angelina said it. It's important to report from the ground, from the.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. Mr. Dzyadko, I would like to bring you into the discussion as editor-in-chief of TV Rain, the Dozhd TV channel, originally from Russia. You've chosen to leave Russia. Well, chosen is a wrong word, I imagine. I'm sorry. But yeah, tell me, how did that come about, the fact that you're no longer operating in Russia, but outside?
Well, unfortunately, it was not our choice to leave the country. We just as many other journalists, we were forced to do so because in a week after the start of the full-scale invasion, it became impossible to be there because they imposed military censorship, and then they adopted these two new legislations on so-called fake news information about Russian military activities in Ukraine and about so-called discreditation of Russian army, which means that if you report something which is not proven by Russian Ministry of Defense, you are spreading fake news information. For example, you report on crimes in Bucha, Russian Ministry of Defense says that information about Russian crimes in Bucha are fake news, then you are spreading fake news and you face up to 15 years in jail. So it's pretty simple. That's why the page of Russian modern history called Independent Media in the country has been turned. There is no independent media outlets in Russia, only in regions, just small, very brave, very important news outlets, but if they're still remaining there. But when we're speaking about big media with big audiences, they are not in the country anymore. For example, our TV station, now we are based in 3 countries. We have the main office and main studio in Riga, in Latvia. We have also a studio in Tbilisi in Georgia and in Amsterdam in Netherlands. Of course, we have 2 main challenges. The first one is how to get information from Russia, and the second one is how to deliver information into Russia. Because the first challenge is connected with the fact that, of course, we and other independent journalists, we are now more considered as an enemies by the government as it was before the war, because it looks like, guys, we forced you to leave and to shut up, and for some reason you are continuing doing what you are doing. That's why it's impossible to have a office there in Moscow or have reporters who would work with a mic with a TV Rain on it or something.
So how do you keep in touch with what is really going on, and not just facts or things happening, but also what you all know as journalists, the feel of
that's the main problem.
What is going on? Because
we have some people there, and thank God it's not 1970s, and we are not radio for free liberty. There is no Iron Curtain, and we have internet, we have social media to connect with the people on the ground, to speak to them. But the main problem is how not to lose these, like the atmosphere, the sounds What are people doing in the subway trains while going to work? How their faces look like? What is the atmosphere? What is the and this is a problem. I don't think that we lost the sense of reality in Russia, because a lot of people are coming here in Europe, and it's easy to speak to the people who are there. But still, of course, it's a huge problem. The second challenge, as I said, is how to deliver information there, since after the beginning of the war, they blocked more than 5,000 websites, and they blocked main social media resources such as Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. For some reason, they have not blocked yet YouTube, and now it's the main source for the Russian citizens to get independent information. For example, we have in Russia, we have more than 14 million viewers last month, which is a lot. But
so you consider that your main role to inform Russian citizens?
Well, of course, we have two audiences. We have audience in Russia, and we have audience outside of Russia. Of course, our main audience is in Russia, because it's our, I hate the word mission, but still, our mission is to provide people in Russia with the real information. And we see that people are eager to get this independent information. And the second mission, again, I hate this word, but still, is just like Андгелина was telling, is to explain. In Russia, it's more difficult, because there are still a lot of people who truly believe that neo-Nazis, under the orders from Washington D.C., were training, I don't know, birds to spread some weapons in Russia, or on eastern Ukraine, in Donetsk region, or in Lugansk region, and there is a lot of people who truly believe in it. It's like it was during the pandemic, but it's worse, because after the fact that they believe in it, they are ready to go and kill people or
take
kill.
It one step further.
So one of our goals is to explain that the world, the earth is still like it was before the beginning of the war. The white is white, the black is black. Even if you are being told on the state TV that white is black, that's not true, and you have to have a lot of patience in explaining this.
Yeah, we'll go into that some more later. Thank you for now. Indrė Makaraitytė, I would like to ask you now. This is also very much a war, and I think not only in Ukraine or between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and the West, of narratives. Would you agree? And a war that has started way before the actual fighting, I think, in Ukraine itself. It's something that you've investigated and come to see for yourself.
Yes, and thank you very much for having me here. And the Baltic states, I think, are the closest allies of Ukraine, and have been feeling the threat of Russia since 2014, even earlier, from the events in Georgia even, and nobody believed but we are right. And yes, before the war, we journalists, I think not only in the Baltics, but those who are in the propaganda issue, in the propaganda topic, in the following those pro-Kremlin organizations, and looking for narratives which were spread during the pandemic, especially. Then we had that migrant crisis at the border with Poland, Belarusian Poland border, and Belarusian Lithuanian border. There were lots of signs that Russia was preparing for something much more serious than migration crisis, for example. And we had in 2021 in August, we had riots at here, right near the parliament. And I remember then I arrived late at night. Then the riot started, and the same time the riot started in the migrants camp close to the border with Belarus, and we had that, the sense of synchronization of the events, what's happening here in the heart of Vilnius and the border with Belarus. And I had that, somewhere behind me, this is not the task, I think that the task is something, it should be something happening. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I mean, we all remember that the military was started to be placed at the border with from the Russian side moved, around Ukraine. I mean, it was everything very step by step. We were going to what we have now. And we did investigation of the narratives, propaganda narratives, and we started that in 2019 because during the pandemic, here in Lithuania, various pro-Kremlin organizations, they organized protests. In the beginning,
about the pandemic, or
about everything.
Mm-hmm.
It was about everything. I mean, about something patriotic issues, about let's say people who were blamed of the participation in the Holocaust, but they may be very big patriots of Lithuania. So this was also an issue. There was no they were not very specific about choosing the topic for the protests. I mean, everything was okay. I mean, every celebration, every patriotic celebration, and we noticed that behind all those protests, there were the same people. Those who organized the protests and those who participated in the protests, and and we also look back to 10 years ago, and in that retrospective, we also noticed that again the same people are behind the same topics, and somehow I think that it started in 2018. Then I believe that an influx of money from Kremlin, I mean, with that influx of money, we see the pro-activation of those organizations. And they finished with the riots at the same as. I do not say that they organized the riots, but they were very active in provoking people for doing something, something violent.
But in order to get to the heart of that and to find out that the same people were always coming back, when you looked into these separate, so-called separate ways of unrest, that meant time, dedication, and continuous investigation. Would you say that that is because it's not, if you do flash reporting, you would go out there, say, this is what I see, this is what's happening, full stop, and move on to the next. But you take it one step further as head of the investigative unit. Would you say that is of the essence also to be able to understand what is going on, to have the time to look into these structures, money too? That's behind what we see on the surface.
Yeah, that's the I think that the essence of the investigative journalism too. The reporters are our eyes and ears, but we need we are given time and we're given tools to put everything into bigger picture.
Yeah. You make it sound very self-evident, but is it self-evident to get the time, to be allowed the necessary finances?
You know, I think that we all know that the most expensive thing in our lives are time. We are always lack of time everywhere. So yes, of course, it's not enough time to do everything, and you know, you would ask any journalist, especially investigative journalist, is he okay with the deadlines? No, he's never okay with the deadlines, and he would like, you know, to be to finish his work yesterday, and in order to make it to you know, publish it tomorrow, and always ask for new deadlines. But despite that, I mean, I think that especially the national broadcasters, especially those whose mission is, you know, to see the broader perspective and to explain. That's very good word. Explain and explain. Yes, this is our duty, I think.
Contextualize as well, and provide depth. I want to remind you, people following us online, ladies and gentlemen online, that you are free to join the discussion via chat, via you can send us your questions and comments, and we'll try and take some of them on board. I cannot promise every question and every comment to be taken on board, of course, but feel free to join. Ms. Ambrožič, I would like to come to you, because we've been discussing, of course, starting with this very strong statement and the story, if I may call it that, testimony of Angelina, looking at Ukraine, zooming out to the relation with Russia, journalism there, and the broader context of the build-up towards it, so to speak. But of course, journalists doing their job in further away, let's say, like in Slovenia. It doesn't mean that it's always easier or without its difficulties or even threats, as you can testify. Tell us of the atmosphere in which you and your colleagues as reporters and journalists for public service media work or have what you have to deal with in Slovenia.
Well, I can't say hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, to be able to speak in this forum. I would not say that we are any further away. We are just in the middle of Europe, so we are trying to fight the same fights as you fight, you all fight. We are, of course, present. We have a correspondent in Moscow. We are present in Ukraine. We were fighting the COVID crisis. We were reporting about it. And as many of you have already said, it's important to be on the ground, not to work remotely, not to be in the office and just watch the world. You have to be on the ground. So for RTV Slovenia, we were on the ground in the period of COVID, and our ratings were really high. And I think all the colleagues who work for the public service media in Europe, I think they have the same experience in the time of COVID. And of course, when we're talking about the war in Ukraine, it's all about context. Who is giving the context in Europe? Public service media. We are the ones who have the correspondence abroad. We are the ones who are reporting the context. It's not always high ratings, as you all know. It's not always high ratings. It's usually quite low. But we are the ones who are staying here. So I am a very proud representative of a public media. I'm going to stay a very proud representative of public service, of us serving the public. Not for all costs. I mean, sometimes it's low ratings, like I said, but we do have work to do because I think the democracy depends on it. So when I'm talking about Slovenia, of course, the crisis, the COVID period and the political, let's say, very biased situation, not biased, very radical divisional
Divisive?
situation.
Yeah, divisive.
So, yeah, deep divisions, political divisions in Slovenia also meant that, of course, public service media is in the turning point. I mean, you have to, I think that the survival of public service media in Slovenia and also around Europe is a big question of the future, and it's not so self-evident. 10 years ago, maybe when we were speaking about whether public service media are going to survive, everybody of us would say, yes, of course, everybody is going to survive. Today, I'm not so sure.
Why not? What is undermining the
I
position?
think that there is in no government in the world, okay, we can say in good democracies, the government understand that they need unbiased watchdogs watching their steps. But I do feel that maybe in the time with the political atmosphere is radicalization, with the radicalization, populism rising, and governments and politicians actually not wanting to have really strong watchdogs, I think that the public service media are in danger. And this is a fact we are not talking about enough. When I'm speaking with our colleagues from the Western Europe, they usually say this is going on in your zone. They say in your zone, whatever that means. But I do feel that around Europe there are voices very much against strong public media. We are talking about finances. It's not just about in my zone in Eastern Europe. Everybody in the Europe, a lot of politicians are talking about the financement of the public service media. And I think that we, representatives of public service, we do have our homework to do. And the first homework we have to do is not compromise on trust. We have to have the highest journalistic standards possible, because we need people to trust us, and nobody will be able to break us, in my opinion. So this is what I think in Slovenia everything is about. I could talk at length about the threats, insults. You've seen footage of anti-COVID protesters, anti-vax protesters. We've had so many in the past years. In the past year, in 2021, there was a really turbulent year. I was at that time editor-in-chief, and I can tell you, I spoke more with the police than with my husband, because I was always calling police, whether they were protests, whether there were insults, threats received by many journalists, especially female journalists. I think that it has to be stressed that female journalists are very much under attack, very much. And of course it gets to you. I mean, it's not easy to be, you know, when you walk the street, and it's not always easy to not be able to feel safe. And it's like this, we are living in a time like that. But we have to rise above it, I think. We know why we are here. We are serving the public. So we're in a public service media, media. And I do believe that the real question after COVID, after Ukraine, after everything there is, we have to address the issue of the survival of public service media.
And you mentioned trust, and I saw, Indrė, you wanted to react.
Yes, then talking about those pro-Kremlin organizations and protests which were organized mostly by them, guess which slogan was the most often during those protests? Against, do not trust LRT. This is, systemic media, like mainstream media, do not trust us, meaning the propaganda channels somewhere in the social media,
Yeah. So I think it is indeed a problem that is that all public service media, east, west, north, south, are being confronted with. But the question is, how do you do that? How do you reconquer the audience, if I may use that word? Because it is about trust, and the impression is that very soon PSM will be only preaching to the choir, those who are already convinced of the importance of PSM. But it's the other part of the public you want to address and convince, if I may say so. Mr. Gutierrez, do you have the golden solution?
Well, at least...
First of all, do you agree that that's the main problem? The lack of trust and the fact that trust in public service media is being undermined systematically, as Indrė and Manica
I would say
mentioned.
that we are facing a full range of threats. So this is just one of the aspects of the... So what is questioned here, what is challenged, is the idea that journalism is a public good, you know. And because you were saying that public service media journalists are attacked, but those working for the private media are also attacked. So it's really journalism as a public good, which is under attack, I believe, by many means. Mm-hmm. So yes, we need support. We need the first reaction, and you mentioned rightly the fact that female journalists are more and more under attack. Journalist organizations, at least, are very aware of the situation, are trying to provide advices to their members, to their affiliates, to go public about these attacks, you know, because the first reaction for journalists is to say, okay, it's part of the job. Our task as journalist organization is to tell them, no, this is not part of the job. You should go public. You should denounce the perpetrators, you know, those attacking you. You should go to the police or to the prosecutor, you know, to denounce these attacks. That is not something we should accept or integrate as part of...
Or take for granted.
Exactly.
But I want to come back to that for sure, because we have another panelist and I want to bring you in to the conversation for sure. I haven't forgotten about you, but I want to stay on the level of structural undermining of trust in public service media. And I'll put the question to you like this: the responsibility in that of governments and the official authorities. Could they do more? Should they do more? Do you see that trust is being undermined from east to west, west to east, north and south?
Of course they should do more, and the first, you know, action would be to provide the needed resources for public service media to operate.
Yeah, but life is expensive and governments have to cut back and budget discussions are going on everywhere.
I just give you a figure. I just came back from a mission to Kosovo and Albania. In Kosovo, the budget of the public service media was reduced from 16 million euros to 8.9 million euros.
It's halved.
They just have enough money to pay the salaries. 800 people.
And
employed.
How do they justify that?
No production, it's impossible for them. So this is an action from a government killing the public service media. How to regain trust, how to be more effective, more credible, more linked with the citizens' needs if your budget is cut in such a harsh way. So yes, independence of public media, independent funding of public media, independent nominations of the leaders, you know, of the directors of and the boards of public service media. This is becoming more important than ever before today. If you want to regain trust, governments are in charge and are responsible to put the right conditions, you know, to create that relation of trust.
It's what we all can hope for, but do you see that happen? And then I would like your reaction as well, Ms. Ribeiro. But
no, I don't think that's happening. Actually, I think that governments are going to lower the
cut back on finances consistently.
And I think it's time to speak about the fact that, of course, the public service media in Europe, a lot of them are still working in the same framework or in the same organizational mood, workflows as they were in the 90s. I think it's time to change, to embrace the digital world, to address younger audience. This is something we are most probably not doing enough. Because
everybody is chasing the young audience, no?
Yeah, every meeting I have with colleagues from other public service media will always speaking the same thing, how to address young audience. I mean, nobody really has idea how, but the world is changing. I think the public service media, in order to survive, will have to change, and I don't think, I think it's in the interest of democracy and in the audience's interest. I don't think it's in the interest of politicians. So we have to fight this very harsh battle, but we have to do it. I mean, nobody else is going to do it for us. Like I said, I'm a proud representative of a public service media, so I'm going to fight my cause.
But then the question arises, I think you will all agree, feel free to interact, where does journalism end and activism begin? I don't know, in some newsrooms this is a very lively debate.
I do have a feeling this is part of our homework to do. I do feel that in the times of radicalization and political struggles which affected the journalism, of course, in the sense of journalists being under threats, journalists being insulted, journalists becoming some kind of a species which is endangered, I would say. Young people are not, that eager to join the journalistic rank because it's so difficult to work in a society where things work as it is. But one part of the homework we have to do, I think, is address the political bias in the ranks of journalism. I think that when you're reading the surveys about why people decide not to trust journalists, and the main reason is they feel sometimes that particular journalists are biased and they're not reporting the truth. So these are the two main reasons they're citing. I think that we have, in journalism, we have to turn away from explicit bias, political bias. I think that when you're watching a TV journalist, a TV presenter, or in whichever other media, you shouldn't be able to tell who he's voting for. So this is where the story begins, I think. When you're watching somebody on TV or in a press, a newspaper or online, you're following him, you should not be able to realize at once who he is rooting for. So this is something we have to do inside. This is our homework, I think.
Mr. Gutierrez, you wanted to react, and then I come to you,
yes,
Mr. Ribeiro.
I really believe that as journalists we should be more vocal on these issues. We should be activists of media freedom, because when you fight for media freedom, you are not fighting for a kind of privilege for journalists. We are fighting for the right of citizens to be informed, to access independent, pluralistic information. So that's the kind of activism I would like to promote, and to because there is some self-censorship for journalists, because we have a free and access to the media, because we are news providers. There is a kind of yes, I don't want to use the media in my own interest. It's not our own interest. It's the interest of citizens, and that's something I would like to call on journalists to be more vocal, as you said, to be more proud of what we do, because we're working in the public interest.
Now, Ms. Ribeiro, please. A lot has been said.
Yes, a lot have been said, very interesting. I very much aligned with what you have been saying about being activists of media freedom, and really explain that we are not defending the journalists as individuals, as a trade union approach, but on the contrary, it's because we are defending democracy, we are defending media freedom. And I think sometimes, I feel when I say safety of journalists in my institution, it's really a top priority. We really need to explain why is that so. But back to the public service. I think that there is a long battle, and we need, and if you want to have a good public service, a functional public service that really serves democracy, we need political will, and we need the awareness raising in the public for them to understand, and then they can push the governments. But if they don't understand what is the added value of the public service, it's very difficult for them to fight for it, and we need them to fight for it. It's not only the public service in itself fighting for it. It's not enough. And
it's a bit the chicken and the egg discussion,
yes,
right?
Yes, but you know, I think that sometimes we need to face clearly what are the challenges of the public service. This is also important. For example, what is the impact of the public service? It's not well explained usually. Maybe we need some indicators, different ones. What is the pervasiveness of public service? Even if the viewership is 5 or 6 or 10 or 12%.
So you'd have a checklist?
It's beyond their viewership, the way they are influencing, the way they are shaping all the broadcasting sector. And this is important. Maybe we need to have another way of looking at the public service, of looking at the influence it has in the overall media landscape.
Would you say then the PSM have moved too much in the 90s, for example, in the direction of the thinking of commercial media outlets, have started to measure success in commercial terms? Too much?
Exactly, very much so. And in terms of audiences, in terms of viewership, and maybe we have to look at the public service because he is a standard setter regarding the work of the journalists, also a standards or content regulator, and this is very important. Imagine that the public service was not there. Maybe our media landscape will be even more disorganized. So let's look at the public service in the other way around to really understand what is the public service bringing to the media landscape and to democracy, and not just looking at it was another operator, another broadcaster, and another set of journalists working. Of course, we can say yes, they are working in the interest of the citizens, not the consumers. Okay, but we need to explain why.
Yeah, go further.
Why we say that? It's not just to say that; it's to explain. And of course, the battle of youth, it's a very important one. And again, we need to face this challenge, and I would say, in a very open way. Well, it's not. We cannot, if we continue to, only be able to attract people over 50 or 60, then we will lose the future. That's for sure. No. And we need to look at how can we explain to young people again how it's important the public service.
It's something that will be elaborated further in later sessions as well, how to do that, because I think we agree on the importance of it, but the question is, of course, how to do that. Peter ter Velde, I haven't forgotten about you. Thank you for your patience.
I was afraid a little bit.
No, not at all. But what you've been hearing here about the importance and the exceptional role, to an extent, of public service media, does that chime with what you see, for example, in Holland, where you're from?
But my background is journalism. I worked all my life for the National Public Broadcaster in the Netherlands, NOS. Also member of EBU, so I feel at home here. But if I see what the NOS, I'm less summer when it comes to less negative about the Netherlands and public service there. I mean, every year in the survey you see that a vast majority of the population, they trust especially NOS. NOS is the biggest news organization in the Netherlands. They reach, sometimes if you see the numbers, their weekly reach of population is around 92, 93%. It's so high. I mean, the traditional 8 o'clock news. I was grown up with the 8 o'clock news. You know how it went when I was young? 6 o'clock we had dinner. That's what you do in the Netherlands. Then I went to then I had to do the dishes. Then I went to my room. 5 minutes to 8, my dad called, coffee is ready. Went downstairs, drank a cup of coffee and watched the 8 o'clock news. That was the past. Nowadays, the only people who still are watching the 8 o'clock news are people from my age and older. But the digital world, and I hear you talking about the digital world, young people. I mean, and then I give the example of the NOS because it's my company. They have new departments working on what they call NOS stories to reach young people, explainers for young people. They use it in education, in the educational system. My own daughter is a history teacher. She uses stuff from the NOS in her lessons, and so children are reached with, hey, NOS, National Public Broadcaster, oh, wonderful what they do. So they try to reach a young audience, and not the 8 o'clock news. I think also my own children, they will never watch the 8 o'clock news in their lives. But they watch other things. They have the app on the telephone. They follow the news.
And so is the trust
but
based
what we see,
well?
for instance, in the Netherlands is trust in public service media, public broadcasters is very high, but, and there we go, there is a part of society that has turned its back against the political world, scientists, especially during COVID and that whole terrible era, turned it back against the political world, scientists, media. And that group, partly, I'm afraid we can never win them back again. Because they are so much in their own bubble. I mean, I have one of my best friends, he was walking around. I went to a pub in Amsterdam. I saw him with a t-shirt, media virus. I said, hey. I said, sorry, I didn't know you were coming. Completely against what he calls the mainstream media. Completely in his bubble on internet. Only watching the stuff that he believes and immediately gets strengthened in his opinion because of the things that he is looking for.
So you're saying basically that no amount of contextualizing, explaining or whatever that has been suggested here before will ever reach him or help him?
You don't reach him anymore.
Yeah,
I'm afraid. Not everyone. I mean, what I see in Dutch society is, I mean, there is a group who is on the edge of also turning their back against what we see as the normal world. I mean, that group can still be reached. So I know, for instance, in our country, the Ministry of Culture and Media, they are really trying now with new programs on schools, etc. They call it media wisdom for young people, teenagers, etc., to explain them the importance of independent media in the country. That group can still be reached. I hope young people can still be reached, that they are not too much influenced by their parents. And I believe they can, we can reach them. But there is a certain group that I'm afraid they're lost, to be honest.
That's a somber message. And
yeah,
I have,
but no. But on the other hand,
yes,
the vast majority is still there.
No, I was just thinking, yes, I understand the situation in Netherlands is much better than many other countries, but it can change overnight if you have a strong
can get worse is what you mean.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it can change overnight if you have this narrative of this against all media. If it's adopted by a political party or a strong political leader, it can change overnight, and it can change. It happened in Europe, in many countries. And it's not something, I mean, Netherlands or any other country is excluded from.
Is exempt from, yeah. No, not at all. Indrė?
I fully agree.
And I think that we forgotten already that this is one of the Russian tasks, you know, to diminish mainstream media, to make it untrustable in the society, and to spread that idea into the society that don't trust the mainstream media. Because if people do not trust mainstream media, they go into the social network and looking for information there. And they find what? They found mostly, I mean, if they go to their channels, they find pure propaganda. And that's it, you know, we did that investigation here in Lithuania about our mainstream media and the trust. And, you know, it took 1 year, 1.5, 2 years to attack mainstream media, and they had the effect. With very small amount of money, with a few organizations, and they had an effect. So everything is so fragile that we, you know, at some point I think that we do not feel it essentially, how it's fragile.
So basically, if I summarize this in a very stark way, then 100 years of public service media undermined in 2 years, so to speak, or hollowed out. Ms. Ribeiro, you wanted to add something, and then I'm coming to you.
Yes. I would like to raise 2 points. One, of course, is that this kind of destruction of media, of journalists, is part of the populist agenda. It's the first thing is okay, the journalists they only produce fake news, so I will be the one that will talk directly to the people, and this is unfortunately this is very powerful, and it's working. And we saw it not only here by some Russian strategy, but in the US and everywhere. And it's a very, very powerful. Destroy the media and destroy the institutions, because these are pillars of democracy, both. It's intermediation, scrutiny. It's really a barrier to the excess of power, etc. So I think this is really important to look at. But at the same time, we have to be very aware that this is only the tip of the iceberg. It's a much bigger problem. It's the problem of our societies, how they are divided, and why is it? Why the populism is rising everywhere.
But the suggestion is this is basically a Russian ploy, as it were. Would you go as far?
It's much more. It's much more than that, unfortunately. It's much more than that. And that's the reason why. And we have to be careful in identifying the roots. What makes us vulnerable to this kind of disinformation? Let's face the challenges.
So there's a before already.
Yes. So let's look at it.
Mr. Dzyadko, let me bring you into the discussion again. If you hear what is being said about trust, I have a number of questions, but first one, if you say, you use the word mission, even though you didn't like it, that you want to address the Russian audience, do you feel there's part of the Russian audience that is lost to you before you even reach them?
I think that the main idea of Russian propaganda over the years, it was not don't trust public service media. It was don't trust anyone, because everyone is lying. All the politics are dirty. Everyone is lying. Don't trust anyone.
So even authorities, or what is the power of authority or President Putin in this case based upon?
President Putin, it's not authority. President Putin, it's like he's a god in this system. So if someone is telling something about the authorities, it's on Russian state propaganda. It's normal when I mean Russian state propaganda journalists or figures, when they criticize government, they do not criticize Putin, because he's not government. He's more than government. So,
but then you want to go against it, and you want to offer truthful information.
So coming back to your question, I think that just a small part of the audience is lost. The majority of the audience, even if these people are not watching TV right now, for example, or even if they are watching these crazy propaganda shows on Russian television, they are not lost. First of all, you have to choose the right tone of voice when you were talking to them in Russia. This is the most important thing. The second important thing.
Can you explain a bit more? What does that mean?
Well, it
the
means
right
that
tone of voice.
if you look at the Russian society, you would see that there are three groups of people, and these three groups of people are the same three groups of the audience. The first group, those who are against the war, they are like main audience of TV Rain, for example, or other independent media. On the second flank, you would see those who support the war, support the government, support Putin, and they watch propaganda, and that's what they are doing. And in the middle, you would see the biggest group of the population, and this group is full of different groups. Group of those who don't care at all. They just are not interested in anything. The second group of people who do not trust anyone, because everyone is lying. Propaganda is lying, and the independent media is lying. The third group are people who understand everything, but they would not admit what they understand. Because if they admit that, for example, Russian army is committing crimes, it means that they should do anything with this.
So they're in denial.
Because they are in denial, because over the years they've been raised by the idea of that their and my fathers and grandfathers, they were fighting Nazis who were killing innocent people, and this is like the fundament of two generations in Russia, and now the situation has changed. It went upside down. Now Russian soldiers are the same Nazis which were fought by our fathers and grandfathers. So if we admit it, then our life is destroyed, and we have to do anything. And we are not ready to do anything, because if we protest, we would be arrested, and we don't have money or possibility to emigrate, etc., etc. So, and you have to find the right tone of voice, speaking to each and every group in this group, in between these two groups. And
them to want to listen to you. That's the idea. Then
they want to listen to you if you at least try to understand what their problems are. Because if you talk to them like, guys, there is a war, Russia is an aggressor, you have to be responsible for this as well, because you're a Russian citizen. Then it's the end of discussion. No discussion will happen after this. So you have to be more, I would say, clever. The second thing is that this audience is not lost to you when something happens. For example, at the end of September, Putin announced a military draft in Russian Federation, and we received more than 6 million new viewers who've never been watching TV Rain. But the fact is that all these propaganda resources, when something happens, people understand that they don't get information from there. And these people, they came to TV Rain to watch it and to get real information. What should they do? For example, in order not to go to the war and not to be killed and not to kill anyone. And what is important, that 80% of these people, they are still with us. The mobilization, the draft is not the main topic now, and people are more are not as interested in information about military draft now. But what is important, that only 20% of this new audience left, and 80% are still with us, because they understand that when they need to get real information, they will find it here. And the last thing which I wanted to say is, in order to get these audiences, in order to get, for example, young generation, it's For example, we have this special show which is called Fake News, where we explain why some stories told by the Russian propaganda are just not true. But also we have and all the media now have all the tools to reach this young audience. When you go to TikTok or you go to Snapchat or you go or you decide how to sell your content to the young generation, you could reach them, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel safe doing your work where you are now?
Well, I'm not in Moscow, I'm in Riga, so yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And another question, the discussion about journalism and activism, how does that feel to you? Is that something theoretical, or do you feel you have a mission, as you said, and you feel that distinction is
I think the war
meaningless?
changed a lot of things. For example, before I was very much against the idea of government banning some TV stations. And I was against the fact that Ukraine, for example, banned TV stations of the group of Viktor Medvedchuk, very much pro-Russian guy. Now I understand that if Russian TV stations or TV stations owned by Medvedchuk would have been broadcasted in Ukraine, then the situation would be absolutely different from what we are seeing now. And now, for example, I have no questions for the government of Baltic states when they banned Russian propaganda TV stations, because it's not about freedom of expression anymore. It's about lie, which leads to the war and to the deaths of people, and it's about the truth.
Yes,
so
yeah.
it's something. The same goes with journalism and activism. If our TV station has a very much anti-war position, is it activism or is it not activism? I don't know.
Or is it semantics?
I'm sorry? Yeah, it's about values. Our values connected with activism. So of course, journalists, they could not be involved in politics. For example, on TV Rain, it's impossible for the journalist to be a member of a party, or it's impossible to speak on a political rally. But if we are speaking about, for example, a rally connected to the freedom of expression and to the topics connected with the journalism, it is more than welcome that our journalists take part in it.
But I understand, Mr. Gutierrez, freedom of speech is not without limits. In terms
That's
of,
one point, but I would like to react first what you just said. I understand your comments about Russian propaganda, but as European Federation of Journalists, we criticized the decision of the European Council to ban Russia Today and Sputnik. We didn't criticize Germany when the independent regulator banned Russia Today and Sputnik. We didn't criticize the Baltic states when the independent regulators banned, because it was done, on the right way, following our standards, our European standards.
So the difference being?
A government deciding to ban, the regulation from the European Council. It's 1.5 pages. So that's something we should not accept, having governments deciding from a day to another just to shut down media, even though these media are propagating, are sharing this information. We have rules, we have standards, let's follow it. By banning, by a decision from governments, without any consultation of public regulators, independent regulators, these channels, we are acting as Putin is acting in Russia. So we should be cautious. That's the danger for our democracies. In such a crisis context, we should more than ever respect our own values and rules and standards.
Yeah, I see people nodding. Peter Tervelde, do you want to add to that?
Because I want to stress that Russia is killing Ukrainians and propaganda is killing people right now. So it's not about the rules and it's not about who is banning the propaganda channel, the government or the independent regulator.
To you, it doesn't, that distinction is irrelevant?
This is irrelevant in the state of war.
And yes, but if it deepens the divide that is already there, we agree on that, and pushes people further away from public service media, for example?
I understand that we're talking about the Ukraine's case. So it's different situation. If, for example, we had the same situation in the Baltic states, what's the difference? Which institution bans the Russian propaganda channel?
Mm-hmm.
Just to be precise, I'm not against banning these channels. It's just about the way you do it. Is it a decision taken by governments? That means that tomorrow they are able to take the same kind of decision for other media. So we should be cautious about it. We have rules. I believe that it's the task of independent regulators in a democracy to take the decision to allocate a license and to remove it, not governments.
Okay, I've sensed that there is more ground for discussion there still, possibly. Peter Tervelde, is this a debate that's also going on in Holland, not with regard to specific
about this one?
Media outlets, yeah, the idea that freedom of speech should all be out there, should all the kind of disinformation that sings around, should that just be...
Oh yeah, of course there is a lot of discussion about it. There was also discussion about RT and Sputnik, and in line of what you say, like government should never do that, because next time they will do some, they will ban some media that they don't like. So what's the ground? What's the democratic ground for it? So I mean, we had that same discussion. There's a lot of discussion about fake media, especially spread by social media. I mean, what is the, let's say, the red line when it's, or the boundaries of the freedom of speech? And so yeah, there's a lot of discussion about it, and that will continue for a couple of more years, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no solutions there yet. I see that Андгеліна Кар'якіна is with us again. I'll be giving you the floor in a moment, but I want Indrė to tell us what...
Just a very short remark, because I think that this discussion wouldn't be worth of our attention if you wouldn't say that propaganda channels are the media channels. It's not media. And if it's banned, but it's not media. Mm-hmm. So
that's why it's not. It's a distinction between the independent boards and governments that you think is irrelevant.
Yeah, so
briefly,
just a short comment since I started this part of it.
discussion in the discussion.
I think Russian government very much likes to be. We are talking now about the procedure, but the point is that, and the Russian government, for example, likes to talk a lot about the procedure, and because sometimes when you are talking about the procedures, you lose the content, the main idea, and the main idea that. They, for example, Russian TV stations, till the February, they were the part of the EBU, but they were not. They are not journalists over last, I don't know, 20 years. At the beginning they were just propagandists, people who were helping Putin to take the whole power in the country. Last 8 years. Or last 14 years since the war with Georgia, they are war criminals helping helping governments kill people in other countries. And I think it's just not the right place to talk about the procedures, because we are talking about the procedures within the media, and as you just said, they are not media. That's really important. And sometimes Apple is just an Apple. Sometimes
you
propaganda,
have to call it for what it is.
Yes, and they are not media TV stations.
Андгеліна Кар'якіна, hello again. You've been following the discussion. Tell us what is your take on this? Are we talking hot air here, or is part of this of the essence now? To start with what we've just been discussing, the shutting down of certain media outlets, Russian media outlets.
No, Annalise, I think it's essential. I just want to quickly jump in, and my colleagues have already, I think, gave the arguments. Sputnik and RT were banned from a number of European countries exactly because they are not media, exactly because they do what Mr. Gutierrez said about the values, exactly that they do the opposite of what the media, and professional journalism is about. So if there's a question about procedure, then organizations like the Federation of the European Federation for Journalism, the European Public Broadcasters should think about the procedures or suggest it, because otherwise we wouldn't have this war, otherwise we wouldn't have this discussion. But I think this comparison is absolutely irrelevant. Of course, I agree to what the colleagues have been saying as an argument. These activities are fueling war. These activities, I mean, what the RT and Sputnik are doing are not only fueling war in Ukraine, but also fueling conflicts, distrust and disruption in the civil societies of Europe. And I think it's the opposite what the media should be doing. So I don't see there a conflict. I don't see there, stepping over any European values. Otherwise, vice versa. This is exactly what should be done. Ukraine has gone a little bit further, and there was a discussion about it. I mean, unless you have a war, maybe it's not too obvious, but Ukraine also has banned Russian social media. I mean, it was a painful step for many Ukrainians who keep in touch with their relatives, with their loved ones, with the people they know, with their friends through the Russian social media. But now we can see that it was also the source of massive spread of propaganda, disinformation that was also fueling these crimes. I mean, something that we're working with right now. So it might be painful, but it's for us, for the professionals to talk about, what is being actually offended here. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that to the table.
Yeah, one more thing. I mean, there are several media outlets in the United States, and I would say they spread fake news. They spread conspiracy theories. I mean, it's not only the two Russian channels what we're talking about. There are many others, especially in the United States. So are we banning them as well? No, I can still find them on my telephone. I can watch them on the internet. So it is a discussion, and we don't have to do the whole. I think then we can talk here for 2 days about this topic. But it is, and let's, for instance, Breitbart News. Is it a news media? I don't know. But for us to say, okay, this is media, this is not media, it is a dangerous one. So, I mean,
you're not. To you, it's not black and white. Ms. Ribeiro, you want to add?
No, it's really dangerous. And then to say, okay, then we have to shut. Do we have to shut down Fox News because of all the pro-Trump, pro-conspiracy theories that they have spread over the years? It's a difficult discussion.
It's a difficult discussion, to say the least.
Yes, it is. It's a very difficult discussion, but maybe, we can say, it's not media, but it's freedom of expression. That's the problem. So let's be clear, and things are different. But at the same time, I also would remind that what is important is to use the right arguments. And the court, when was deciding on the appeal of RT, used the right arguments. And the right arguments are, this is propaganda for war. And propaganda for war, according to international standards, according to Article 20 of ICCPR, is definitely should be banned. Okay, so but this is an important, we cannot say it's only propaganda. We have propaganda every day in every media so we need to be very careful.
Very
use
specific.
the right arguments. And this is, I published a statement precisely on it in the beginning of March, and precisely to say, okay, if it's we don't monitor content, but if it's propaganda for war, it falls under Article 20, and then we should ban it.
Yeah. But
let's use the right arguments, and that's the reason why I think it's important that the court decided this way. And they were very clear about Article 20 and about the banning under Article 20. So we need to use the right terms, we need to use the right arguments. Yeah. That's my point. We need to be very, very careful, because if we are not, then we start mixing everything.
Yeah.
I fully agree, and just to be precise, the argument used by the European Council to ban was economical sanctions. So it was not about this. So the court made it clear afterwards. But the justification for the ban by the European Council was not based on this, which is a pity. And that's why we criticize it. Again, of course, I'm not promoting or defending the content of Russia Today. Yeah? I'm just questioning the way European governments decided to ban it.
Because you may also argue, and that's what I gather my colleagues were also implying or saying, that maybe if, according to the standards, it isn't warmongering propaganda yet, it paves the way, and it already primes the minds in a certain direction, and it may be too late to catch up when you finally decide, according to the procedure, to shut down one or other media. No? Okay. Yes?
Definitely, it was a clear strategy, and I think that in the future the universities will look closely, and this will be clearly a case study, how to prepare the war, how to manipulate public opinion in order to have them supporting the war. And definitely, I have no doubts that it happened. First of all, to make this kind of brainwashing, and then simply eradicate every independent voices. The two together is this is propaganda for war, and it's very interesting because one of the resolutions of the UN General Assembly on Article 20 was precisely to say propaganda for war. It's not just about propaganda for war, but it's about not informing, depriving citizens to have access to certain information. So obliging them to live in a bubble that really doesn't allow them to have access and in a way to aspire peace. So when you have a strategy to make the citizens away from peace, this is also propaganda for war. It's not just, you see. So it's very interesting, and sometimes it's good to look at all these resolutions of the United Nations and look at the international instruments we have and use the right arguments. That's otherwise it's dangerous. It's dangerous.
We are getting towards the end of this panel discussion. A lot has been said. I know a lot has not been said yet. The day is still young. I want to land on the practicalities again. We started out with Angelina's testimony and reporting really from the situation as it is right now. Safety of journalism, Mr. Gutierrez, you already mentioned it. You say this is no mean feat, not something to take in your stride, not something that just goes with the job, comes with the job. You should act upon it, do something, not think it's normal. What kind of threats or difficulties are journalists faced with personally, in person? Can you give us a couple of examples?
But yes, first of all, it's important to monitor the cases, and the Council of Europe is co-organizing this conference. And the fact is, we have a fantastic tool, which is the Council of Europe platform for the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists, launched in 2015, and reporting, monitoring any single case of media freedom violation in Europe. We have now 1,400 alerts, including 46 killings of journalists in Europe, 46, and I think 15 in the EU member states since 2015. This year, 13 killings, 12 of them in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So it's very important to monitor, because it's a way for us to identify the trends.
And what does that teach you? What does it show?
First of all, the number of cases is growing. Mm-hmm. On a yearly basis. So every single year we have more and more alerts, which is worrying. We are facing a growing trend of a full range of, I would say, threats. We've been discussing yesterday during a hearing of the Council of Europe subcommittee, media subcommittee, about slaps, legal threats. But I explained to the MPs present that we should consider not a threat by its own, but the full range of threats. Because when you have a slap, so a legal intimidation,
you're being harassed.
Yes, exactly. It always starts by intimidation, classical intimidation. For 100 cases of slaps, maybe you have thousands of cases of intimidation. If the intimidation doesn't work, so the complainant will go to the court. If the court doesn't work, maybe it will go to physical attacks. Mm-hmm. That's what's happened to
scaling
Daphne.
Up, as it were.
Look at the case of Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta. At the time she was killed in 5 years ago, in 2016, she had nearly 50 legal cases. She was facing, including prosecutions launched by the former Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, and members of the government.
So you're saying one kind of threat is no less intimidating or important to take seriously than
exactly.
the other.
You should take into consideration the whole threats increasing, including, as mentioned by some of our colleagues here, the specific threats faced by female journalists.
Yeah, I want to bring in Ms. Ambrožič. You wanted to react?
Yes, I just wanted to say that in fact the fact of the matter is that the police is not doing anything. They're just, I went to police at least, I'm not sure how many times. And actually at the end they say, well, he has to physically harm you and we will do something about it. So this is the reality. There is no case law.
So it's all very well
so
jotting it down
let's
and
just hope
taking
nobody's
note.
going to do anything, while you're walking on the street. The slap cases, I think this is really important. We're not talking about it enough. I was dragged to court last year like a million times. By now I know the exact reaction of a judge when he has a strong politician suing you for something he's not satisfied in the program, and the way some of the judges are reacting, it's surprising. For me, it was always like, this is such a stupid lawsuit, I think it's going to be dismissed at once. Of course, I'm in the right side of the history, but I was not always on the right side of the history, I can tell you. By the time I went out of the court, I was not really sure whether he is intimidated by the politician or not. And more often, I felt that the judge was. So the long arm of political influence is very tangible and very present. So this is something we are fighting.
So even if there are procedures, you're not necessarily guaranteed a safe working environment or...
No, so the threats, the insults and the slaps, this is a perfect way to silence a journalist and make him go out of the profession.
That's very serious. Mr. Ribeiro, then Mr. Gutierrez, and then I want to bring in Mr. Tervelde.
Thank you very much. Just to add, yes, that we have to look at safety of journalists from different perspectives in a comprehensive way to really ensure that journalists enjoy the conditions to proper do their work. I think this is very important. That's the reason why we have a project on safety of journalists and precisely looks at SLAPs, at the different working conditions, physical safety, etc. But I would like also to focus a little bit on the issue of harassment of women journalists. This is a real problem because they, in a way, face a double threat because they are women and because they are journalists. And we are now, we have this project, it has been a project of the RFOM for quite a while, and we are now developing with Julie Possetti a kind of a tool to really follow the cases to monitor the cases. You mentioned, when do you know that it can turn bad? And Julie Possetti is designing for us precisely a kind of a tool, a kind that allows us to really monitor the kind of harassment women journalists are suffering, to understand which is in a way, a possible turning point. Because there is nothing virtual about online attacks on women journalists.
Absolutely, but then the question remains what Ms. Ambrožič mentioned. So what if you have these lists and if you track it and if you monitor it and the police doesn't do anything? But Mr. Tervelde, I want to bring you into this discussion because you've been trying to make something happen, but how?
Yeah, I was in your country 2 months ago, and there the situation is much different than in the Netherlands. What we have, what we have is a platform. Employers and employees are in it, which is really...
We meaning in Holland, in the Netherlands.
Yeah. So it's employers and employees who shook hands and said, listen, the climate in the country is changing and we have to do something for our journalists. So they are in it, but also police and prosecutors' office. And they said, listen, we want to help you as well. So it's completely different than your country. So that's what we did. We made a protocol. I'm not so into protocols, but you have to live up with the protocol. So that's what we are trying to do. So when a journalist comes to the police station, he has a preferred position, for instance. So that means when he files a complaint, police immediately helps. You're not underneath the pile of complaint, but you're on top of it. And they immediately call the prosecutor's office, say, listen, I have a journalist here. So he got arrested, or he got threatened, or he got injured, or whatever, and they immediately follow up. So...
And does it work? Does it really work?
It works. We have seen, in 21, we have seen around 45 court cases. And it worked. So it means they really did something. Prosecutor's office, they demand a 200% penalty requirement when it comes to a journalist, and judges followed it. So that works, but that's only that side. I mean, also the media world has to do something. So we have employers, employees in it, so they have to do something as well. Media organizations, they need safety policies. They need to do something for their journalists.
They don't have that. Not all of them.
Most of them not. Well, if they send people to Ukraine or to another country, yes, they have. But to work in the Netherlands and to go to a demonstration about COVID or like what we have this weekend, you know, Black Pete in the Netherlands, the whole discussion about that. There was rioting, a journalist got harassed, etc.
So you have to
the media
prepare for
organizations,
violence.
they really need to do something as well. There is a huge task for chief editors and also to protect their journalists, not just to send them to a demonstration. Let me give one small. In the past, when a demonstration started at 2 o'clock, you could easily arrive at 2:30 because the whole public was there. The main speech was at 3 o'clock. You could interview a few people. You could listen to the main speech. You could go up with your camera on the stage, have a few shots, and your story was done. Nowadays, if something starts at 2 o'clock, we say you have to be there at 1 o'clock. You have to prepare yourself. How to get out of here? Who are the people who are gathering here? Where's the police? Can I talk to them? Yes or no? So it really comes to a new way of working when it comes to journalists, and not only in the Netherlands, also in Germany, in Belgium, in France. I talked last week with British journalists because in Britain it changes as well. In the whole Western Europe it's changing. Yeah. And that climate that is changing and becomes more threatening, we really have to do something with it. And that's what we try to do now since 3 years with our platform. Also monitoring. So journalists can send in the reports of threats. Female journalists you mentioned. Next week we did a huge survey among female journalists. We published it next week. Online harassment, it is huge. Twitter, huge, especially Twitter. Yeah. So the coming month we are really going to think, do we need some extra trainings, different training, a different approach to the female journalists? We give a lot of trainings to journalists, but we want to see if there are specific needs that we have to provide for them.
Okay. Mr. Gutierrez?
Yes, I want to say that this is really a role model, you know. It's
what we're talking about here.
It's cooperation between media owners, journalist organizations, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Interior. So it's really cooperation between governments, journalist organizations, journalists, and that's what we need to, you know, to address some of the threats, new threats we are facing, like the slaps. For the slaps, and I would like to insist on the, I would say, vicious nature of these slaps. Because the slap is a way to distract the journalist from his mission, you know. It's most of the complainants on slap cases, they don't want to win the case.
They just want to.
They just want to annoy the journalist. You know, maybe you know the case of a journalist in Belgium, David Leloup. He was facing, because he was working on corruption cases in Wallonia, he was facing 7 procedures at the same time for the same articles. Criminal procedures, civil procedures, self-regulatory complaints as well.
Just keeping him from doing his work, basically,
of course,
and intimidating.
The guy spent a whole year defending himself and not investigating the cases. So that's why it's vicious, and that's why we need the cooperation of states, because we need governments to adopt specific legislation. We need anti-slap legislation. There is a directive from the EU, but the EU directive will only address cross-border cases. So we really need every single state in Europe to adopt anti-slap legislation.
This sounds all very something to strive for indeed, but what I take away also is that the situation and the reality may be very different depending on where you look at and what you're talking about, because, for example, the way you describe persveilig, I just want to bring in Manica, because what you describe and the cases you refer to are all Western European, and the reality of what you describe is quite a different one. So what do you where do you think lies the solution? Is this on a pan-European level, or is there more need of awareness of the reality of each other's difficulties and circumstances in which we work? Is that still a blind spot?
I think it's like war in Ukraine. I'm just doing a special program about the war in Ukraine, and everybody I'm talking to says, well, nobody really saw it coming. So I would say that in the past 2 years, we were living, let's say in the past 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we were living in like a normal reality. We thought that this is forever. So in the past 2 years after the COVID, after the Ukraine crisis, we and the rise of the populist and radicalized political movements, we should face the new realities. So I can tell you that 2 years ago, I thought that my life was normal. So 2 years ago, fast forward 2 years, I think that I'm in a chaos. I can't handle, these new realities are in journalism, in society, in Europe concerning war. Who would have thought that COVID will close us down for 2 years? So I think that these are new realities. I mean, when my mandate started in 2018, as the editor-in-chief, nobody was speaking about slap cases. By the end of my mandate, I was the professional in slap cases, because it starts when somebody calls you and he says, I'm going to sue you. And I say, okay, sue me. You're just one in the line, because there are so many of you who are suing me, so it's okay, just sue me. And these are the new realities. I mean, when I started my mandate, okay, there were harassment online. By the end of my mandate, I have half of Twitter muted. I never block anybody. I'm a journalist. I don't think it's professional to block somebody, but I have so many people muted. So right now, I'm just receiving news from British, French, and English media and nothing else, because everybody else is muted. So this is the new reality, and this is something we have to face, I think. I mean, after COVID, after war in Ukraine, I mean, Europe, it's a totally different place we are living in, we are working in, and our democracies have changed and are going to change, not just in Slovenia, but also in Netherlands, also in Germany, also in Switzerland. It's with us. I mean, it's not like we have our world back. I think we are entering the new world, and we have to adapt and change the rules and adapt to the new realities. This is what I'm... And I just want to say something, because I think that Андгеліна has left us. I mean, she is right now doing the most important editorial work in Europe, and I would feel really bad if somebody did not say this at the end of this discussion. I mean, her role is the pivotal editorial role right now in Europe and most probably around the world. So I think that she deserves our the deepest possible respect for her work in these conditions. I will have to say this because I'm coming from the same profession. I feel
True words. And I think those are the perfect words to conclude this panel discussion. As said, I want to thank each one of you. A lot has been said, a lot has been started and not really taken to the end of the discussion, and as far as that's possible in a forever shifting world, and we'll have to reinvent our attitudes, our stances, our values, not really the values, but the way we fight for them as we go and in a forever changing world. But I want to thank you for all the food for thought you brought to this discussion, the openness, the honesty. And of course, there will be more to discuss later in the day, and as we have lunch and coffee breaks later. But may I ask you to applaud our guests: Teresa Ribeiro, Indrė Makaraitytė, Manica Ambrožič, Ricardo Gutierrez, Tikhon Dzyadko, and Peter Tervelde. Thank you very much. And I have just one final word while our guests are either staying seated or prepare for lunch, because that's what's next. I don't know, do you hear me still? Yes, with this microphone as well. It's been a long discussion. You were all
still there. I could feel it. Thank you for that. Lunch is being served, as I said, and we would like to start again at 2 o'clock exactly, so looking forward to seeing you again, and that goes for you online as well. Thank you very much for being here and for your attentiveness.